Hello, hello, welcome, Wrestle Purists one and all, to another edition of Ruthless Discussion. Here with my wonderful and lovely co-host in the other direction here, Sat Niangi. I, of course, am Tempest. We're here for more spirited debate and more ruthless discussion. Sat, what's causing all this?
What's causing all this? I want to say Brian Alvarez. Funnily enough, Brian Alvarez was reviewing the latest TNA pay-per-view show. He was talking about Leon Slater versus Javon Evans, and he nailed on something. I don't want to say stumbled onto something, but he made a point about something, and it started. My brain started to move in many different directions because he was talking about how guys like Javon Evans and Leon Slater at the moment they're like what, 21 years old. And it seems to be that we've been conditioned that every time a wrestler gets labeled young or the future, it means we have to wait for them to actually get to that place. And then the question becomes, why do we have to wait? Why not now? If they are polished and they are the complete package, why are we not going with them right now? And then you risk, if you label them the future and you risk waiting so long, you may miss the boat. So that's causing all of this. And I'm excited to talk to you about it because we can almost write a book or a video essay on how being labeled the future is literally the Ponzi scheme of get young wrestlers to chill out. This is how far we can take it. Stone Cold Steve Austin and Dustin Runnels were labeled the future once upon a time, and they nearly, you could say they missed out the boat on Dustin, but he's had an illustrious career. But Steve Austin, he nearly, never made it. So it's like, let's we're gonna get to the heart of this. What's causing all this, Tempest? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good, brother. I'm feeling good. I'm very happy to be back in the saddle, back on Wrestle Purist, the main feed. Make sure, of course, that you like this video, subscribe to Wrestle Purist if you haven't already, and send in your super chats if you want to be in on the discussion here. We already have one from the lovely Kale of Kale saying that Storm Ripley Perez should also be in this conversation. This is a grand old conversation that we will indeed be having, and this is going to cover a vast array of different promotions and stars and eras in which various people were pushed at various times while others weren't. Now, Sat, I always appreciate you being my co-host, my lovely and fabulous co-host who I adore sharing the screen with.
You too,
and
man.
this wonderful man sent me a text message last night that was about 6 paragraphs long, be like, I want to talk about something. I'm like, all right, go off, brother. You laid it all out basically as you just did, where this has been Brian Alvarez's hill that he's dying on for the last few weeks. He's really gotten a bee in his bonnet over specifically Javon Evans in NXT and his sort of lack of push. And this is coming at the expense of many weeks of watching NXT, really riling the man up. But served very well to illustrate the problems on display at this weekend's Bound for Glory pay-per-view. Of course, we had Leon Slater, we had Javon Evans having the best match on that show, even with a ridiculously terrible finish. And it just goes to show, again, when the talent is available, what do you do with it? And the flip side of that is, of course, what sort of disqualifying factors are you going to throw in front of guys to not have them get pushed? Which of those are valid? Is a young age one of those things? I'm not so sure that it should be. And of course, not all of these wrestlers and cases are going to be the same. So this is a much broader conversation than just yes or no, or whatever the approach you might want to take to a topic like this. Thank you, everybody joining in on the chat. We appreciate you all. We appreciate the support. Always appreciating it. Thank you very much. No matter how long you are staying, no matter if you're watching this live or on catch up, thank you for joining us here on this lovely Wednesday night. So, Sat.
That's me.
Sat, that's you. That's you.
Yeah.
My favorite. Now, I think we can just kind of jump into this discussion because this is literally something that we could talk for 3-4 hours about. We won't, for the sake of everyone's time and ours, but there is no stopping this conversation in terms of running out of subject matter. So immediately, this is kind of this is an impassioned topic at the moment. It's going around. in no small part due to Brian. But this is something that has not been new by any means.
No,
In
no.
specifically WWE being the biggest game in town for a long time, and a long time the only big game in town. But there are lessons that can be pulled from that, applied to other ones, and experiences that other promotions have had that you can again use as an argument one way or the other for these sort of things. But what were your thoughts over the last few weeks, over this weekend, seeing Javon Evans still in NXT, very young man, a 21-year-old man, didn't know what I believe a Sega Genesis was in a recent interview with O'Shea Jackson Jr., which I thought was both cripplingly sad and very funny. A young man, to say the least, but not one that has been consistently pushed in NXT, certainly hasn't really been featured on the main roster until very recently, making some limited appearances on SmackDown. But for as much talent as a guy like that has, needless to say, has not gotten the ability to showcase that talent to a similar degree that his talent could reach. Sat, your take on all of this.
So I'm gonna confess something, and it's not one that I'm proud of. But I drank the Kool-Aid. I believe what was preached to me. I was like, Javon Evans, he's 20, 21 years old. We got all the time in the world to push him. Even at the time when people saying, "Oh, Javon could be the face of WWE, like in the future or whatever," and I was like, "Yeah, the future, but not right now, because he's only 21, man. He needs to learn the hard cam some more. He needs to speak more broad in his promos." The guy is a complete package. When Brian Alvarez said it, I was like, you know what? I'm letting 10 years of conditioning get. I feel like the pandemic. The reason why I use the pandemic is because that's when the Roman Reigns era of the pandemic started. Sure. And then because of the 4 years of being world champion, there was a backlog of guys that never moved up. If you want to talk about the origin of why WWE is currently in a situation where a lot of 40 plus guys are getting main event pushes now, is because their time was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. Because if certain guys are getting pushed, everyone else had to wait their time. And then the longer it's like the more they're waiting their time, the more they get cut. So with Javon Evans, I was thinking to myself, especially with the great performances he's been having on SmackDown, the match against Sammy, teaming up with Dragon Lee and so forth. I was like, there's no reason why you can't bring him up. But obviously at the moment, the NXT of today is not like the NXT of 10 years ago, where you had a plethora of so many indie guys, that indie darlings, like that was waiting in the wings to become your next big thing. Guys coming from Japan to be the next big thing. At the moment, they desperately need Javon Evans. You even got Ethan Page, who's 35 years old, who's my age, or even a year younger. I don't know. He's 91, 98. Anyway, but you got guys there that should move up. Someone posted today on Twitter, like Tony D'Angelo's been in developmental for 8 years. And I'm like, he hasn't been there for 8 years because he needs developing. It's because he has to wait his turn like everyone else. And then the more you wait your turn, the more a new guy will come in and cut in the line. Because, for example, you can say that the moment that Ricky Saints right now as NXT champion should have been Javon's time, because it looks like that was a story that Shawn Michaels was telegraphing from even late last year or early in the year, that a man to end Obafemi is to be Javon Evans. Because Javon Evans on NXT the last month or so, he became the main character. He was the guy trying to figure out what his next journey is, where his next chapter is, because they send him on a lot of side quests. You got the Undertaker saying, "Hey pal, you should light it up a bit," or wherever it is. You got many different guys giving him advice. Even Ricky Saints is kind of little broing him, and I don't know if Ricky Saints' time as champion and end with Javon Evans, especially with the groundswell support, the banging on the door by Brian Alvarez. Is just that he should have been a champion. He should have ended Oba's title reign. But at the same time, you've got Ricky Saints, another guy who came from another company. He was considered the future at a different brand. And look where he is right now. He's now 35 years old. It's young in a lot of people's eyes. It's kind of maybe old for a lot of people's eyes. It's kind of going to get with it. And I was going to use one more example. Leo Rush, once upon a time, was considered a young wrestler in NXT WWE. He used to be a 23 pound of gold, 24 pound of gold. Now my guy's like, what, 31 years old. Is he been aged out? He's not stuck in the tag team because he waited in line. And sometimes when you wait in line, you'll never get where you need to go. And I can continue going on and on because we've got Tyler Bates to talk about, Pete Dunne, guys that were the future, labeled the future. Now I'm wearing masks. One is not producing. So being labeled the future could be an albatross because Drew McIntyre once upon a time and Elijah Burke were labeled the future. Drew McIntyre was able to recoup that and be the future, while Elijah Burke became Pope. He became an announcer, never won a world title. So being called the future or the one doesn't guarantee you, getting anywhere.
It doesn't. And I think we've got Black Yakuzu over here saying, I do understand and agree with the overall point, but we tend to forget that wrestlers are also active for much longer than they used to be. I think that is a good entry point to a certain bit of discussion here, because I don't disagree with that necessarily, right? Like, generally speaking, wrestling careers, like, we have had various advancements in medical practices and whatever, and people are taking care of themselves far more now than they used to, and all of these very good things. But generally speaking, there are big differences between a 35-year-old guy in developmental and a 35-year-old guy in his prime tearing it up, right? Those are two incredibly different things, right? You would look at them and be like, they're both 35-year-old wrestlers. Why, blah, blah, blah. But again, the time moves differently for different people. And that is something that, you're not always guaranteed to have the opportunity to break out at a given moment. So if there is a time where you have people either like a Javon Evans or, throw Leon Slater's name in there because they come as a package this weekend in a phenomenal match. It is Obafemi, loads of them, and we will to loads and loads and loads of different examples of these guys, but guys and gals. It is very interesting the state of where we are in the business at the moment, right? Where, like you said, there aren't as many top spots as people might think there are. And because we had a very long conversation about the build to WrestleMania this year and how messy that was and everything. And it, in no small part, is because you do have a pretty healthy main event scene in WWE, and all of those mouths need feeding in a sense. So when you're trying to find space to move people up, that is more complicated than, than saying it, right? I do want to put that out there ahead of time, because this could very much be just shouting into a void about, particular wrestlers not getting pushed, right? Yeah. But I don't think that's actually the point necessarily with regards to the feelings of people looking at some of these, very young talents and just seeing them not be capitalized on. And that, I think, is the big thing, because I don't even necessarily think that you need to have Javon Evans winning, world titles or anything like that. Maybe it's a little early for something like that. But I look at someone like Javon Evans, and immediately I look at a wrestler like that and say to myself, if I was getting into wrestling right now, like if I was an 11-year-old fan again, looking at this roster, I would probably say that Javon Evans would likely be my favorite wrestler, just by watching him, his style and everything. And having that is very important as a quality among these wrestlers. Not everybody can have that. And obviously that's just using myself as an example about this, but he very clearly has that kind of charisma that he could be a lot of people's favorite wrestler given the opportunity. And I think just being able to find ways of showcasing these people to be used prominently, not necessarily on top, but why can Javon Evans currently not be put in a position similar to Jeff Hardy was, at various points in his early WWE career, right? He doesn't need to be winning, all of these things, but he can be in, a rivalry where he's not losing to Josh Briggs, where I'm sorry, but if I'm looking at these two guys, Javon Evans has significantly more upside than Josh Briggs does. And to see Javon Evans, despite that, losing a feud to Josh Briggs and just kind of being stuck on a treadmill in NXT so much of the time, I find that very frustrating to watch, because I just don't think you're getting as much as you can out of a talent like that. Now, that could be said about loads of different people of various different ages and everything. Like, you could always pick out somebody, and saying that they're not being pushed well enough, right? But very rarely do you have such a blanket statement being used by people within the business to justify it. And that blanket statement being that, oh, well, they're too young. They just have, they got to do their reps and whatever. Bum that, man. If someone is good, them being young can be part of that story for them. If you are just going to mentally disqualify them, from being able to do that just because of, their young age, that to me just says that you are not as creative a booker as maybe you think you are. Because there's so many stories you can tell about a 21-year-old guy who's fantastic in the ring. Maybe he's inexperienced, maybe he's naive, all these different qualities that you can look at and put onto a young guy like that and give people even more reasons to get invested in them as a character. That's on you, man, as a booker, to be able to get the most out of your talent. And so many times I think we've seen, particularly WWE is like, the big example of them with the most track record to pull from right now, not doing that. I know the big example that everybody is going to pull out that I'm sure would have come up in this conversation one way or another is you look at people like Tyler Bate and Pete Dunne. And at one point, Tyler Bate was this super incredible, amazing wrestler who is 19 years old and lighting the world on fire. And oh my God, isn't it incredible that someone so young could be so great?
Mm-hmm.
And now 8-9 years are starting to go by. And now he's just another wrestler in his late 20s waiting to get a push, And I'm sure you were having the same sort of people saying the same sort of things at that time of, oh, well, he's young. He's got all of this time to do it. All of a sudden you turn around, all that time's gone. What is Tyler Bate going to point to and say, like, that was his run in the early 20s? And even if he didn't win titles or anything like that, what can he point to as the big successes of his 20s so far? Not to say that he...
Ruka.
Sure. he had a great match with Walter, whenever 2019, 6 years ago.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Right?
Man.
Put that on that. He's like, that's when I was last great. Or the fact that he's the last NXT, he was the first NXT UK champion. He's the last NXT UK champion. He can put down his hat as well. Like, I did that, guys. I was the first and the last,
Yeah, it's just... cycle. It to me boils down to getting the most out of as many people as possible. And that goes for all manners of pro wrestling booking. And when you are making that more difficult on yourself by putting an asterisk next to a guy that they're not going to be pushed as prominently as they would be if they were 10 years older, I think that is a failing on your part as a booker. Sat, your thoughts?
So I agree with what you said, but I've also was thinking is like I typed down developmental hell. Sean Spears been in developmental on and off since 2005. So he's been there since the Bush administration on and off in developmental, territories. Just to let that sink in. But we're not going to talk about Sean Spears. But Sean Spears was probably labeled once upon a time the future because he was in the same class as CM Punk and Cody Rhodes. Let that sink in. That's the class of wrestlers he was with in developmental all those years ago, 20 years ago. And now look at him. He is now there as a player coach kind of role. And the reason why I'm bringing him up is because sometimes you get languish in developmental for the longest time and then that stinks with you. I don't know if there's a thing. I don't know if that's actually a thing where if you've been in development for too long, you're just seen as a failure. I don't know if they wrote him off because he was in there for far too long And then Josh Briggs, you know, you brought that up. And yes, Javon Evans did win the feud, but I guess it's stuck in Tempest's mind that why is Javon Evans eating the pin when he had one of the best matches at Stand and Deliver early in the year? He should be having a more upward trajectory. He hasn't even won the North American title, which you'd assumed he would have won by now. But Josh Briggs, another guy who's a final Evolve champion. There's so something in him. He's never really been my cup of tea. But something not being my cup of tea doesn't mean it's not someone else's cup of tea. So I've never poo-pooed, oh, why are they pushing this guy? I'm like, well, he fills a quota. They see him as a millennial Bradshaw. as much as you think about that, you're like, what? Yeah, they put him in the lineage of Stan Hansen. And you're like, that is sacrilege. But they see something in him. But recently, they realize that he's on a timer. He's been in developmental since what, 2.0 days? It's kind of like, you know, it's now or never kind of with him. Even though he's getting X-Pac heat, they think it's good heat because he gets booed and Josh, go home. Or Josh, you know, we don't want you, boo, you suck. So they think, oh, it's heat, he's getting a reaction. But it's not the type of reaction you want. It's not like, oh, we want him to be... He's kind of got like the Jack Swagger kind of thing about him, where it's like, you're this big guy, but you're a bit mediocre, but they're going to push you because you're tall. But they see right through him. It's like, when you see Obafemi, you're like, that's an authentic big man. I think that's what it is. It's Josh Briggs has the same issue that Austin Theory had once upon a time. He's playing his cocky heel, and then I have to give it to him. Logan Paul comes along. You're like, oh, that's how you play a cocky douchebag, because he is a cocky douchebag in real life. But that's how you get the character. And you have Grayson Waller, another guy labeled the future, but he's a guy that's actually 35 or 36. So he's now hanging out with New Day. Even in NXT, he was having a great run, rarely lost. And you're thinking this guy's going to be the next big thing. Doing promo segments with John Cena, with Edge, but he has to wait his time. Because he's like, your time's not right now. You're the future. And the biggest victim of all this is Carmelo Hayes. Mm-hmm. Carmelo Hayes is in the same class as Bron Breakker, is in the same class as I would say the bird lady, but Lyra Valkyria, same class as Roxanne Perez, but Roxanne Perez has been tag team champion, and Roxanne Perez is the last of the people that I mentioned to actually get on the main roster. She really won the tag titles, and Lyra Valkyria is having a great 2025. But Carmelo Hayes is still in the same spot or slightly lower than he was when he's debuted on the main roster, because he was the first draft pick, had a match against Cody. That's the highlight of his run, because since then he's had a match with Andrade, but it doesn't mean anything in 2025 when he's got nothing to show for it. And then people all do the same thing. They say, well, he's young. He's working with The Miz. They do that thing where it's almost patronizing. The Miz is a double Grand Slam champion. He's a former two-time Intercontinental former two-time WWE champion. He's like, no. See, there's a difference between The Miz and Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins is a bona fide main eventer, a guy that when you put him with someone, the fans' perception changes about that person. You're like, I'm taking this guy seriously because Seth was part of the Shield, the greatest trio in all of wrestling. And so I'm going to believe if someone like Bron Breakker, who doesn't need the vision, and I'm glad that he saw the vision, because he was defending the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania. So it's not like he was Joe Blogs eating catering. He had a main spot at WrestleMania. But what I'm trying to get at is Carmelo Hayes is with a guy that's on the way downward trajectory, like The Miz. So putting Carmelo Hayes with him does not elevate him. It puts him in the same stand. It also might put him the same stink on him, because you got guys like Javon Evans when he gets up on the main roster. What's going to happen to Carmelo Hayes, especially if they're going to push him into a babyface? He's going to be in the back of the line. You're like, we like you, Carmelo. We're giving you that tepid MVP kind of run, because MVP became babyface, but he was never the same. It wasn't the same MVP. They took away the tunnel. They took away the swag. They made him to a glad hander. We don't want it for Carmelo Hayes. But unfortunately, Road Dogg, he's going to go into the same book that everyone uses of how to book wrestlers mediocrely. That's a new word I made up, mediocrely. But you got Bron Breakker, who's holding up the world title while Carmelo Hayes is feuding with The Miz, when Carmelo Hayes was the franchise player of NXT. So it annoys me. People have to wait their turn. Wes Lee waited his turn. Where is he now? Unemployed. And then me and you talked about it on your birthday, actually, on your birthday celebration. And people have a theory that Wesley got released because Javon Evans ticks the quota that he used to tick. He used to have braids. He was a baby face, North American champion, great title reign, you know, all that kind of stuff. Then they cut his hair and they turned him heel. He was never the same. But in their minds, maybe I'm wrong, but it's like, oh, we got two black guys. They both do high flying stuff, but only one of you can get a push. Well, you're now like 30 now, aren't you, Wesley? 29, 30. Well, I'm sorry. You were the future. We have to let you go. Wesley was in developmental since Black and Gold, since late Black and Gold. And then he was tag team champions. Then his tag partner got released. Then he had to fend for himself. Then he got over. And then he had a run of a lifetime as North American champion. And you'd think when he came back from injury, fair enough. That's this the weird thing. They were begging for more main eventers. You could have made him a main eventer there and then. Yeah, Obafemi came along, but that's another reason. You waited so long to push him. Obafemi comes along. Sorry, even on the main roster right now, I'm pushing this along because right now you got someone like Grayson Waller who came up to the main roster. I'm going to be the guy one day. Nope, hold on. Obafemi's coming now because Obafemi is got an upward trajectory right now while you're hanging out with New Day. I love New Day, but that's where you are right now. It's just that you get all these promises, even in New Japan, you get labeled you're a musketeer, you're Red Narita, you're Shota Umino, and you're Yota Tsuji. Tsuji is the only one of the three that is ready to be a main eventer because he's got a complete package in terms of character and match and consistency. And I'm fingers crossed he's the one to end Takeshi's title reign. But Takeshi being the first guy in the mid 1990 to become champion is another thing we need to talk about, because before then it was Jay White, who was born in 1991. WWE, the youngest world champion they have in terms of age, it was Gunther, born in 1987. AEW, they're doing well at the moment because MJF, born in 1986. Before him was Hangman Page, born in 1991. What I'm trying to get at is, in WWE, they say the youngest guy we push is 41-year-old Damian Priest. I like Damian Priest. I'm not dissing Damian Priest, but you can see there's a discrepancy going on right now. And you have two world titles. You could easily make the world title that Bron Breakker hopefully wins as the title to go for. But then you have another issue. We had another young guy from 10 years ago. His name's Sami Zayn. He's now in his early 40s. We need to give him a push as well. So what I'm trying to say is there's a backlog of young guys that need to get pushed, and then the young guys become older. You got LA Knight, who's a young guy in Impact Wrestling. Then they wasted his time, and he didn't want to drop to Tessa Blanchard. Then he went to developmental when he could have went easily to the main roster and become champion 2-3 years ago. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm jumping all around to make people understand that this issue lays in so many organizations. New Japan is also a victim of this. And Pro Wrestling No is the only one's doing well. You got Kaito Kiyomiya, he won champion. He was born in 96. You got Ozawa, born in 97. So they're doing well in that regard. But you got young guys ready to go for it. The women's division, that's another thing. I know, Tempest, I'm going to give you your spot. I'm going to use women's division as an example. They're doing well right now. I got nothing to complain because Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss, they're holding the tag titles. You got Becky Lynch holding the mid-card titles, while you're letting people like Tiffany Stratton, born in the year 1999, flourishing, having a great career year. Yeah, the title reign has become kind of meh, but at least they're doing something with the women's. We can also argue the women don't get that same kind of focus as the men because there's more investment in the men. Hence, so there's so many cooks in the kitchen getting things wrong. But when you let things be, you get a women's division. Throwing it back to you. I had to throw that stuff out there.
And the women's division that in many, many people's minds, I can't really see a world in which it wouldn't be true. It has been the highlight of WWE's programming this year.
Boom.
You know? Absolutely. Before I get too far into it, big shout out to new member Vala Mamadapudi. Thank you very much. Always lovely to see a familiar face right back at you. This, of course, I think you touched on so many good points, right?
Chuck everything on the wall.
So many good points. I think, like, again, the point that I really want to kind of it is such a difficult conversation, right? Because it is much more nuanced than people might think, right? And you might just fall on one side or the other of like, yeah, push young guys, or no, it's good to have them develop and everything. If there is room for development, I am absolutely not going to say that, you know, people should not be sent to, you know, NXT for a quick stint or something like that. You know, learn the WWE style, just get familiar with like their video team, the production team, how to market yourself in that kind of way. Not everybody is going to have a very good character. You know, you look at like, you know, Tyler Breeze was back in FCW as Mike Dalton, you know.
I remember him.
I'm not going to say that they should have pushed Mike Dalton just because he was a younger guy, right? It wasn't a winning character, and you got to wait for the package to be complete. But the issue then stems from when the package is fairly close to being complete and they're still not willing to do it just because of age. That, I think, is the big issue here. Now, I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking about this today because there are so many different, it's so dependent on the roster construction of the time, whether there is spots for people to move up, all of these different things, right? Because you bring up New Japan Pro Wrestling, I think it's a very good example where I look at New Japan Pro Wrestling from like maybe 6-7 years ago, right? Say like the last year that the Elite were there. And you look at the people that were on the low end of that roster, right? The ones where those people are the future, right? And that's about as effectively marketed as they ever kind of were, right? That roster works a lot better when people like Juice Robinson, Evil, Sonata, guys like that are on the come up, right? And then at various points, they are being asked to take on a much larger role for one reason or another. Maybe some of the top stars are starting to age out. Maybe the young guys that are coming in next year, Shota Uminos and Ren Naritas, aren't quite developing at the rate that you were maybe hoping that they were. There's loads of different ways to look at the situation that is New Japan Pro Wrestling over the last 10 years. But I think it very much does also speak to there's a big difference between the roster construction of New Japan Pro Wrestling from 7-8 years ago and the roster construction of New Japan now. And a lot of the planning that could have gone into making the roster construction of New Japan Pro Wrestling right now a little bit more like it was 7-8 years ago, a little bit more, well filled out here, there, and everywhere. That's the kind of planning that you do with the young guys 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. That's when you start getting people ready to have this kind of moment. The big knock against New Japan right now that a lot of people have said is that there really hasn't been a major effort done to make this next crop of young guys feel like main event talents, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I think there's a very strong possibility that maybe they were just looked at as too young. Maybe they were looked at as not fully put together, and thus maybe you don't want to run Shota Umino and Kazuchika Okada while he's there. But you need to then do a better job at packaging all of those things, because all of a sudden Kazuchika Okada's gone, and now you've got Shota Umino to fill that hole, and nobody wants him because the work wasn't done. So it's very difficult to quantify. Each situation is a situation all on its own that can be looked at, analyzed, and what have you. But if you look at WWE, as we have been as well, where you've got a women's division filled with, Rhea Ripley pushed quite young, all things considered. I will give a very big thumbs up to that. That's the thing. This is not just like WWE bad needs to do this, right? Because you can absolutely look and find examples, particularly in the women's division, of them doing exactly this, where it isn't a problem. Maybe that comes with a larger issue that what old means if you're a woman is significantly earlier than if you're a man. Yeah. Maybe that will have something to do with it, where all of a sudden, if you're a 40-year-old woman, they absolutely don't want you. Whereas if you're a 40-year-old man in WWE, my God, give them WrestleMania main events for a decade straight. So differences in situations here, there, and everywhere for sure. But I will, for the sake of this conversation, give them props for pushing people like Rhea Ripley to the level that she has, pushing people to an extent like Roxanne Perez. Although even still, when I was looking at Roxy being the Ring of Honor Women's Champion and seeing how excellent she was, to now be looking at where we are at 4 years later and a very long run in NXT, followed by some tag title wins and stuff, you could absolutely have gone even further with Roxanne Perez and the push that she could have gotten given how good she was at the age that she was. And she's still got plenty of time. whatever, right? Maybe I'm making that argument for them, but there's no excuse for it when it comes to the men. The men's division in WWE, it is systemic in that. The idea that the most recently born WWE World Champion was born in 1987.
Yep.
That is ludicrous to think of. That is absolutely preposterous, right? Like, the idea that one of those trivia questions that goes around and everything is like, who is the first world champion in WWE born after the first WrestleMania, right? And it's Seth Rollins. I think he was born in 85 after the show at some point. For 85, and Seth Rollins won that fucking belt for the first time 10 years ago, to now 10 years later only having 87 mark the latest born world champion in WWE history. And it's not for a lack of options either.
I think he's 86 because there's a reason why Roman calls him little brother. I think he's 86.
Sure.
And Cody also was in that bracket of young because he's 86 as well. So you can argue both of them were the baby world champion for Gunther. And that's mind-blowing because you hear Seth Rollins promo, I'm the future, I'm gonna take the company. There's a reason why I'm happy Braun's turned on him. Even though that wasn't the initial plan, they broke away from the formula, which everybody was groaning. I think the issue was familiarity of, like, we've seen this done so many times. You did it with Evolution, you did it with the Shield, you did it with the Bloodline. You always do this thing where you got one main guy and a young guy, either he gets betrayed or he betrays the master. Rarely do you ever get guys or the creative go the Shield route. Yeah, they got Dark State, but we're not talking about Temu Shield. Like that, everything about that group. There's only one guy in that group that I love. And it's Saquon Sugars.
Yeah.
Ironic, right? It's the indie guy that everyone, but he seems the most complete of the group. Everyone else is playing a character that I don't believe. One guy's trunks is too short as well. You know the one I'm talking about. So what I'm hoping for with Division is that, because someone else put in there, Brock Lesnar or CM Punk lead division. No. These are old head mentalities that we're institutionalized with the idea that Braun Breaker needs someone. The guy can cut a promo well. The thing is here, the funny thing is, right, there is night and day with Braun Breaker when he initially was NXT champion and he had that brief moment when he was on the Raw roster and you saw that he wasn't ready, compared to when he was squashing guys with spears. Night and day. You can understand, yeah, he's NXT champion, but he still had more to learn because at that point, he's been wrestling for a couple of years. So there's some seasoning that needs to be done. I feel like Javon Evans is more further along at age 21 than Braun Breaker was ever at that age. Some people get it. Some people it's instantaneous. It's kind of like it's natural gifts that you can't hone in. All they're doing is adding, I don't know, little trinkets here and there, but they're ready. Javon is like complete. You cannot teach him anything in ring. In terms of promo, authentic. It kind of vibes with the TikTok generation of kids that talk a similar kind of way. But the reason why I'm trying to get at Braun Breaker is by making him wait this long, which there was their plan, or he's going to turn on Seth next year. The guy was just Intercontinental champion. There was no reason. You're telling me now, Tempest, you wouldn't believe Braun Breaker beating CM Punk for the world title because he hasn't really lost that much. Yeah, he lost to Jey Uso.
Believe it.
Right? Jey Uso's the only one that can claim it because he hasn't really lost a lot. Because people can say, I'm like, he hasn't really lost. He was demolishing Sheamus early in the year. He was going through guys like Penta. He hasn't really lost that much, So for him to turn on Seth Rollins, for me, I'm like, come on, because we talk about the ruthless aggression era. But the reason why we had a ruthless aggression era is because Stone Cold was gone. Rock was in Hollywood. Triple H was shit in the bed. You can't trust him to be the guy. So you needed multiple guys. That's why you went to the OVW guys. That's why you had Brock Lesnar, you had Batista, Shelton Benjamin, John Cena, Randy Orton. Those are the guys that potentially could be the guys. And then you give Brock Lesnar the title because Brock Lesnar, like Obafemi right now we're looking at, is authentically terrifying. You don't need to wait that long. When you believe that this person, no matter what their age is or their experience, they could beat up Stone Cold Steve Austin at King of the Ring 2002 qualifier. That's the guy you go with. Obafemi's the same. Only Tony D'Angelo and Ricky Saints are the two people that can say, yeah, I'll pin his shoulder to the max. He's never lost that much. He lost twice. That's a guy that I believe can come to the main roster and end Cena's time in the company. Fair enough if you don't want to do that. But I will clap for WWE's SmackDown Creative if the whole Sami Zayn Challenger of the Week was designed for the end goal being that Obafemi is the one to end Sami Zayn's title reign. If they do that, I'll clap. I'll be like, that is smart, guys. You created this thing with a baby face that people relating in Sami Zayn, and then you're gonna strap the rocket to Obafemi, because Obafemi is like Goldberg, like Brock Lesnar, like Yokozuna before him. Big guys that you can easily put the title on. When people are saying give him the world title, I'm fine with that. It's because you need to do more things. Yeah, you've got guys like Roman who's still around, Seth is still around, but it's still no excuse. I get it. Back in the days, you lost your guys. The Attitude Era guys were gone, so you're stuck with Undertaker, Kane, and Triple H. They're B+ players, so you need a new A+ players. But you got a bunch of A+ players all coming up at once, and you risk running them out of the company or making them stuck in mid-card hell.
Very well said. Another lovely super chat coming in. Very kind words from Misha Sumra saying, wait, I get Tempest on a rad time and the House of the Black Mask on stream on the same day. Huzzah, love you guys. Hashtag all the content. Yes, indeed. If you want to check out my very long, very entertaining A Rad Time podcast over on Adam Blampier's Patreon, we talk about his top 10 favorite comic book movies and my top 10 favorite Japanese wrestling matches. Ooh, what a good time it was. As far as this goes, I think it is funny. I think so much of it does come back to like a backlog of top stars and everything, right? Because it feels like a bit of a random point. But, if they had maybe just gotten that Roman Reigns push right 10 years ago, maybe we wouldn't have had to have a 4-year title reign where this all then happened.
Yeah.
5 years ago, it's etc. I just wanted to throw that in, throw some shots back to an old regime that also had no fucking clue what they were doing, but I do think this is interesting discussion because I think there are many, many examples in WWE that you could pull from. There are many examples in like other companies as well. And no company is perfect. I'm not going to be like, oh, WWE bad, this other company good, when it comes to this, because every company has their failings with things. But I'll bring up AEW because I think there are some interesting examples there as well, particularly at the moment, where you look at the crop of young talent. There's always been lots and lots and lots of young talent in AEW, in the very early days. The amount of people that were still in their 20s was staggering, of people that you thought were going to end up being tippy top stars. Now, you can talk about, the attempted pushes of many different people here, there, and everywhere in AEW and to varying levels of success, but I think there is often a much more concerted effort being made with a lot of those young talent than there are in WWE at times. Maybe that is simply because of the existence of NXT and WWE's mentality of keeping people like that, locked up in NXT for a while longer. Whereas in AEW, they're going to sink or swim and they're going to do it on TV, and that's going to be that. But you look at people and you maybe you take a look at someone like Julia Hart as an example, very young as well. Either the youngest or one of the two youngest champions belt holders that AEW's ever had. It's like her or Colton Gunn, I think is the youngest, right?
I think she's the youngest.
Yeah. And you look at that, and obviously Julia Hart is not currently like positioned as a world champion or anything, right? But she certainly got a bit of a run there for a little bit as TBS champion. There were problems with that. She got injured. That's not her fault, etc. But there, Nick Wayne. Well, Nick Wayne is, I guess he was a trios champion. Ignore me. My goodness. Look at them all. These young whippersnappers.
They push them
I
young.
used to be good at trivia. I used to be good at trivia.
You still are, my friend. You still are.
I appreciate it. But again, you look at Julia Hart and the presentation that they did, where Julia Hart was really becoming popular for a time. Great presentation. Always has had a great presentation. As soon as she turned evil, of course. But she then becoming TBS champion was at the very least like you're kind of testing that out. I don't know how much of a difference it is, but in my mind it might be huge that this like testing it out phase happening in NXT just is so much more of a drawback. And I understand that that is kind of like what developmental is for, but at the same time over the last like 13 years I have not seen NXT be used as proper developmental for hardly any of it. You know, you have your success stories for sure of people that they've trained or people that they've developed, found characters for, etc. I'm not going to say that it's a complete dud, you know, but I also have seen either with this regime or the last where tinkering with someone's presentation and everything and trying them out doing this, that, the other thing in NXT has not yielded results on the main roster, you know, very often. You know, you're much more likely to find the outliers among the ones where it did work out than the ones where it didn't, you know. So I don't put a lot of stock into why we need to have NXT be this, you know, this kind of breeding ground for these really young people figuring it out when so many of them already do kind of have enough of it figured out that they need experience doing something else. That's where I think a lot of the struggle for me comes from with regards to people like Javon Evans, or pick any of your aged out wrestlers that have gone through NXT over the last 10 years, you know, because over there I'm looking at people like, I'm not going to say that, you know, Nick Wayne or Julia Hart or any of these people were fully complete packages when they were put on screen, but the point is that their age did not disqualify them from being put on screen in the first place. Maybe even in the case of Nick Wayne, before he was 18 years old, he wasn't being put on TV, but that is merely for a legal reason. You know, as soon as he hit 18, 19 years old, he's on TV and he's wrestling really well, and he's being put in storylines where he can, you know, be put with other people and learn and grow on TV. Why is, you know, Javon Evans not being put with veterans on the main roster to learn from on the fly, you know, being put either in a faction or a tag team, or having a mentor relationship with somebody and having that be again part of his character. You can have coaches and things like that in NXT or, you know, backstage on the main roster. That is all well and good. You know, that there's absolutely a place for that. Those people are earning their money and all of that. But it doesn't do anything for the presentation of the wrestler as far as we see it. Yeah, they might be making adjustments and everything. They'll take the things that they're learning from people like Shawn Michaels, Undertaker, whoever is talking to them backstage in NXT. They can take those things and apply it to themselves, and that's very good. But when you have enough talent and enough star power, enough charisma, enough presence to be able to be put on TV, you know, on the main roster, you can absolutely take those people, use them on the main roster, find ways for them to learn on the job, and get to the destination of them being a money-making asset for your company so much faster than going through that whole process in NXT anyway, then going through that whole process again in WWE, because you know that none of these fucking guys ever just get pushed right out the gate when they go to the main roster. How many times have we seen people make an immediate impact and just bam, off they're going, off they're running, they're top players. You can name them probably with your hands. It's like the Shield, Kevin Owens, you know, maybe the Four Horsewomen. You'll struggle to come up with too many more, right?
Right back for a bit. I mean,
Ryback. Oh yeah, Skip Sheffield really made a big impact for you. Yup. What it do?
Yep.
Nah. You get what I'm saying though? Like,
yeah.
time is precious. Time is the thing that we can never get back in this life, right? And one of the earlier points made was that wrestling careers are longer than you might expect. Yeah, we're not talking about like NFL football players here, right? Where the average career of one of these guys is maybe 4 years. So you really got to make your money and get in, get out, right? But if you're looking at it like, baseball has careers where it's much longer than that on average, typically, right? Generally speaking. But baseball is not afraid. Most guys take a little while to develop. Baseball is probably the best comparison in terms of, an athletic sport, the major sports in North America anyway, where you're looking at these guys and it takes longer for a baseball player to develop to make it to the major leagues. They go through the various stages of the minor leagues, and in wrestling's case, that would be the Indies and NXT perhaps before making it to a main roster. But in baseball, if you are good enough to do that, you will see people like Mike Trout and Bryce Harper in the major leagues at like 19 years old because they're good enough to be there at the dance. Now, of course, straight sports and pro wrestling are not a one-to-one comparison. There are things that you need to learn that come with a lot more time in pro wrestling, like psychology, like all these things, rather than just strictly the athletic ability. But the point is, in baseball, you're not going to send that 19-year-old kid to the minor leagues just because he's 19 if he is going to be one of the better players on your team. You're not going to do that. Maybe you'll do it for contract tomfoolery. But generally speaking, if you're trying to win and that guy is going to give you the best chance to win, he's going to be on the fucking team. And right now, you're going to be, Javon Evans would be, let me take that again. Javon Evans would be one of the best fucking players on your team if you put him on the main roster right now. So why the fuck isn't he? It's because he's too young, which is fucking stupid.
Yeah, it's stupid. Because he can end Dominic Mysterio's title reign tomorrow and nobody will cry about it. And you know that he'll put an even better title reign because the quality of his matches will be much better than what we've been getting currently. That's the thing that's a bit annoying, being labeled young. I was thinking of Charlie Dempsey, a guy that rarely ever gets mentioned except for the fact that he's William Regal's son. Charlie Dempsey, who seems to have all the fundamentals. Yeah, it's the character thing that they're trying to nail down. But after nearly a year or two in developmental, what have they done with Charlie Dempsey except for putting him in excursion in All Japan or Noah or wherever it is? He's a guy you look and you're like, what are we actually doing with it? That's me. No, everyone's wondering, but I'm wondering because the no quarter catch crew, which he was part of, broke up. They all splintered out, gone their separate ways. Are they going to do better? It seemed for a moment that Randy Orton Jr. was going to do well by himself, but he seems like he's back in the mid card, kind of floundering. I forgot his name. That's how
Miles Bourne.
Miles Bourne. Phew. I was about to say Mr. Stephanie Becker, but anyway, yeah, Miles Bourne just chilling over there, and then you've got the other guy, the one I know his real name is D'Angelo Hancock, but Tevion Heights is another guy that was getting a lot of hype in Pro Wrestling Noah because he had a great excursion. And then they gave his excursion storyline to Josh Briggs, which did not make sense. But he's another guy that at the time when you saw him wrestle, you got excited. You're like, oh, they're building up another main eventer. But I feel like all the hype they had from coming back from Noah excursion has gone away. Mm-hmm. Then they made him team up with I just seen her name, Tamara Stock. The way I'm just forgetting her actual main roster name, the Olympic gold medalist. But yeah, the stink of her washed over him, and now he looks like a jabroni now because recently lost to Ethan Page. So it's kind of like, what are we doing? Because you're meant to be developing, but there's no output trajectory. The old NXT had like a factory where it's like, you're gonna spend 6 months to a year there. You're gonna at the time when there wasn't even a North American title, you fight for the NXT title. You either win or you lose. But if you got enough upward trajectory or mobility, we'll move you to the main roster. And then the North American title was introduced. You'd be North American champion for a bit. Johnny Gargano was the introduction of that. You'd be North American champion for a bit. Then you go for the main world title, and then you stay in developmental because Johnny Gargano did not leave developmental for quite a while because everyone's afraid about being buried on the main roster, which is part of the reason why we have this factory full of wrestlers who wait for their time. And you're like, how old are you now? You're nearly 40 years old. Gargano's one of the young hot guys, and now he's on the main roster. You're like, you're a veteran now, guy. I don't know if we're gonna give you the title. I know it seemed like you were gonna be champion one point. Tommaso Ciampa, that heel run you won, dude, you're already like 40. Are we gonna wait for like 5 years to do the storyline again? You know, so there is a lack of assurance. I think that I want to get to the root of it, because we're talking. I mean, we can talk about for ages what's gone wrong with the developmental system, or like what I call the Ponzi scheme being labeled young. Yeah. But the main crux, the main issue we're trying to get to the heart of, guys, is there's no example of being an NXT 2.0 guy and it guarantees you being a world champion. Bron Breakker is accidentally stumbled into something. We don't know if they're going to make him the guy next week, or it's going to be, CM Punk is now the leader. That will fucking anger me. Go with Bron Breakker, because when you look at Bron Breakker, you can't say, well, he needs to tan a bit more. He needs to add more barks. He needs more catchphrases. When he's got a catchphrase, people will barking their heads off in Australia. He's over. So go with him. It's that assurance. It's knowing that you can go to the main roster and not beat Grayson Waller and Austin Theory, where you're just sitting there doing nothing. Because believe it or not, if New Day was still baby faces, Javon Evans would be their underling or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you're, again, very much right in that there are so many factors to all of this. Like, there's still like 5 different just conversation topics regarding this that are still just rattling around in my brain right now, right? Because you could really go into and like analyze the run of NXT just in general. Because I think you've harped on something that is very interesting, in that may not have ever been like young guys, right? But like, you do look at that era of like the Garganos and your Ciampas and all of that, right? And for one reason or another, they were just locked down in NXT for so long. And the NXT model, while not proper developmental in a lot of ways for its time in the classic black and gold era, you know, they had some successes for sure, you know, but generally speaking, it was the WWE indie, and it was, here is where you're going to have your WWE indie run for a year or so, maybe a little bit longer depending on who it is. But generally speaking, if you look at like each of the different TakeOver Brooklyn main events, they each represent a different era of NXT's, you know, roster. You know, the first one is Balor versus Owens. The second one is Samoa Joe and Shinsuke Nakamura. The third one is Bobby Roode and Drew McIntyre. The fourth one is Gargano and Ciampa, right? The turnover of NXT was always very much key. And it meant that you couldn't just hang on to these guys for the sake of having them in NXT for no reason other than just having them there, right? Obviously, there were still going to be your journeyman people that were in developmental for years and years and years, your Shawn Spears, you know, your Tyler Breeze, your various people, right? All these guys, you know, they had their parts to play, and I won't go further into any one specific example of those guys, but the longer that time went on in NXT, that turnover went away, right? It was a production line. Like, you had a new main event crop every year, and it meant that the takeovers were always exciting. It meant that there was always a new fresh face coming in. They were going to be sat in the front row. And yeah, there are a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen so much anymore. There's other options for those kind of wrestlers to go and you know, to go and sign with. But at the same time, the production line stopped when AEW gets introduced, and all of a sudden it wasn't about developmental anymore. It was about, this is the show that has to beat Dynamite. And for one reason or another, we may literally now be looking at the effects 5 years later of the Tuesday Night War, or the Wednesday Night War, which then led to Tuesday Night NXT. You know, if you have the Wednesday Night War go on for however long they went head to head, 2 years or so before NXT switched off and they rebranded, and that wasn't deemed a success, that plays a large role, because all of a sudden you now have several more years of Gargano, Ciampa, and all this. The same way that we're talking about that main event scene in WWE being clogged up by a bunch of guys because you had a 4-year title reign of Roman Reigns and all the various other bits, the multiple mouths they need to feed. All of those things also kind of apply to NXT, where at a point you kind of had to make up for the fact that you don't have any NXT stars once people like Johnny Gargano are no longer factored into the equation, once people like Tommaso Ciampa aren't factored into the equation. Sorry for their potential pushes. They are no longer the people that they were in 2015 when they were breaking out in NXT, because all of this took so long. Again, we can go back. We could talk about, the AEW side of things, where you've got people like MJF who at the beginning was looked at as the future. He was the future of the company, but MJF was never not put in a prominent position to grow, I think is a important thing. Now, also worth mentioning, not everyone is fucking MJF, right? MJF is a generational talent. He can talk and not need to wrestle as often as other people would to probably try and get over to a similar length, right? But that being said, I don't think people will look at MJF's usage in AEW and harken back to any particular like negative time. Obviously, there were blips, but in terms of his usage over the course of those first 3 years leading up to his first world title win, there wasn't a lot of wasted time. The same kind of applies for a lot of other people in AEW. You think of Kyle Fletcher nowadays, right? Over the last year since his breakout and heel turn against Will Ospreay, no, he hasn't been immediately shot to the moon in terms of like, he's world champion or anything, which they could do, but it would be a choice. But he's always been put in a prominent position to still shine. That, I think, is a big difference between the way that AEW has presented a lot of these young talent and the way that WWE has. The same way where I say that Javon Evans could be pushed at a similar way to like, an early 2000s Jeff Hardy, where he can win the Intercontinental title. He can lose it back the next week, but sew that then into his character. Put him on a stage where he can grow his fan base and therefore give you another massive asset to your brand to then work with, right? That, I think, is night and day different between AEW and WWE. Again, you can always take individual guys, try and pick apart, whether or not they have worked out or why or whatnot. But on a general level, I think AEW has taken so many more young people and given them various avenues to try and get over and be used in a prominent position that actually does provide some sort of return on investment. I don't know what the return on investment has been with half the young guys that have come through NXT over the last 5 years.
I agree. And another thing I want to add in terms of the original NXT Black and Gold, you can argue that Kyle O'Reilly is in the position he's in because he spent so many years in NXT, right? Because all the young years, you can argue that most of the Undisputed Era guys wasted the young years in developmental. Because when you think back of Adam Cole, you think like, man, that Adam Cole run in NXT. But there's no reason why he couldn't have a great mid-card title run during that time period. Stay there for a year and leave. This is the guy that was one of the franchise players of ROH, PWG. It's done so much that he didn't really need developing. You can almost argue that as much as it seemed like Triple H was trying to increase our excitement for wrestling, it also was a detriment to some guys that went there. I mean, look at Bobby Roode at the time. Yeah, Bobby Roode is one of the factors why Black and Gold became what it was. But at a cost, he became a guy in his 40s on the main roster, already written off, because at that time the regime was old head regime. Because it's funny now, right? So back in the days, if you're in your 40s, you're too old to get pushed. But nowadays, it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like it's like a coin flip. You're too old to be world champion. Now you're too young to be world champion or to be a champion. Because I love when you mention the fact that they're not experimenting enough with how they want to push a young wrestler. Let's talk about Rocky Maivia for a second. In 1997, was Rocky Maivia ready to be Intercontinental champion? But no, we're going to have him beat Owen Hart. right? We're gonna have him beat Owen Hart because why not? It was Owen Hart, right? Because he's a fact checker. Because I could get this wrong, but I assume it was Owen Hart that he beat. Could be wrong, guys.
For the IC title the first time.
Wait a minute. No, it wasn't.
And then
Triple H?
he beats
Triple H?
Triple H the first time.
I'm
Yeah.
about to say, yeah, because 96, Mark Mero, and then he got turned
Yeah.
Perfect.
I know the lineage of the IC title.
Yeah,
I
I'm
know
doing
that
it
one.
myself.
I
I'm
know
trying
that
to get
Yeah.
I think wait, was it Owen Hart beat him for the title? Is that the LOL? Yeah, I think that's the LOL. I think it was Owen Hart that beat Rocky Maivia. So I got that alternative reality kind of wrong. Sorry, guys. What I was trying to say is Rocky Maivia was nowhere near where he was, but he did what you said by putting the Intercontinental title on him. It conveyed to the fans, whether they liked it or not, this is the guy we're going to go with. As much as you think it's nepotism, he's not ready, he seems phony, he had a poodle haircut at one point, or wherever it was. But they were showing like we are excited about the future. It's 1997, Rocky Maivia, Tiger Ali Singh. We're going to give him the Kuwaiti Cup. We're doing something, damn it. The youth movement's in, baby. And only one of them is now a Hollywood star, multiple-time world champion. Another guy was complaining in a concussion lawsuit.
No, it's a great example though, because just look at it this way. Like you got Rocky Maivia coming in 1996. I think generally speaking, the die Rocky sucks stuff is like overplayed in terms of history. I don't think that many people were actually saying that he sucks, but there was enough of an undercurrent of people not liking the push of Rocky Maivia that they went in the direction that they went with. How much different would the business be if instead of just putting Rocky Maivia out there and kind of figuring it out, adapting on the fly to circumstances, seeing what he was good at, what he wasn't good at, and reacting to that, how much different would the business be if they held him back in developmental for another 2 years, figured it out then, and just put him on TV as a more complete package, as a little bit older, right? What if we missed the Rocky Maivia era?
Yeah.
What if we
Straight up.
missed the Rocky sucks era? What if we missed all of those things that are the cause of him joining the Nation of Domination and then starting the ascent of The Rock? What if we just instead, because in many people's minds, Rocky Maivia in the early days was considered like a failure. He wasn't doing well. He was going to have to be pushed because he wasn't succeeding as a babyface. What if they just held him back until they thought he was going to be ready to be a babyface? Maybe he would have been good, but I bet he wouldn't have been The Rock.
Nope. You lose the chip on the shoulder. Like it's kind of like it's part of the law of The Rock, that him being rejected, and then it made him work extra hard, and it gave him the motivation to cut the kind of promo. Because sometimes you look at young guys. So he's an example of a guy that was probably a couple of years in the business and probably wasn't ready for the push that he had, but they did it anyway. He had a WrestleMania 13 title defense as Intercontinental Champion. That's something that rarely happens nowadays. It's almost mind-boggling that guy that started last November, the following year's WrestleMania, he's your Intercontinental Champion. He's defending it. They don't do that anymore. They don't really gamble like that. Because even if you talk about Randy Orton, it took a couple of years for him to actually do something worthwhile. You can argue injuries as well derailed him. A lot of times it's injuries. Wesley, you can argue what would happen if he never injured his back. Now that's like the great what if now, to add to the canon of a litany of what ifs. Because injury can also take away. Because you got guys like Kyle O'Reilly in AEW was tearing it up for a few months. Then injury derailed him. And what happened? A new crop of hungry guys comes up. Then you got Powerhouse Hobbs. Because I want to label people that are currently in AEW that Hobbs is in his mid-30s now. You can't argue he's the future that much longer. And you look at a guy like Bobby Lashley, and you're like, why can you not take that template of Lashley? Then again, Lashley, he was a young guy in 2005. You know what I'm saying? Everyone was a young guy once upon a time. That's what we're trying to get at. It's just that sometimes you wait too long to pull the trigger, and Powerhouse Hobbs can get the push that Lashley is currently having or may have in the future, because Lashley figured it out. Maybe he needs the right people in his ear, but Powerhouse Hobbs, he has a decent moveset. It's quite interesting about how what it is. Sometimes you need that intangible. 10% will know about intangible. You need that intangible to make you stand out, no matter how young you are, how big you are, how inexperienced you are. They can't deny it. Look at LA Knight, for example. People were mentioning him. He's considered too old, But my goodness, every time he cuts a promo, it reminds me of Austin. Not because of the cadence, no, the hunger. You know, when someone's hungry, he's chomping at the bits. I need to be on this level. I can't let this opportunity go. That's what, and it sucks. I like Damian Priest, but if I would choose who would be the guy that I would have pushed, I would have went with LA Knight for the simple fact that if LA Knight lost the title, he still would be over with the fans. Because you got Damian Priest, he was over for a bit. They used Rhea Ripley as subterfuge to get him over as much as you want. They use camouflage. They use little things to get him over. They like, it kind of reminds you of Undertaker in 03. At one point, people were saying, you know, and they had the Terror Twins. Then you take that away, and it's weird because Damian Priest, the reason I mentioned him because he's in the 2-0 category. He had charisma in NXT, and I'm starting to doubt myself. Did he have charisma as the Arch of Infamy? Because he had a cool factor. You just think about a hot tub, because the guy today you see, he probably browbeat people for being in the hot tub. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
He's Captain No Fun. You know, he's Zion Quinn. He's gonna come and give you advice as your uncle. You know, you should listen to my virtues. You should do this, do that. I'm happy for Damian Priest, but it's like that's a guy you look at, you're like, he's never gonna be world champion again. But he's never gonna have that momentum unless he's a heel or something like that. But LA Knight, it's weird. I want Obafemi to be world champion because some people argue not everyone can be world champion, but just there's certain people you look at them, you cannot deny them. You know what I'm saying? And LA Knight is a guy that was done a disservice. This is Impact's sins. Yeah, he was global champion, a belt that no longer exists. But does that really count? That's a conversation for another time. But it's quite hard. I want Obafemi to be world champion. I want LA Knight to right or wrong. They should have happened years ago. There is so many guys. And at the end of the day, it's a broken system that needs to change. We need to change old head mentality. Get rid of Bruce Pritchard. Get rid of Road Dogg. Get rid of old WWE guys in AEW telling Tony Khan the wrong thing about how to push wrestlers. He did it the right way. Hangman Page, quote unquote, young guy wasn't ready yet. But it took them 2 years to get back. They didn't let him flounder, and he was a mid-card or a joke heel. And here's another guy I want to talk about, and it'll be the last thing, and I'll give it back to Tempest. This is what happens when you wait too long. You end up like Preston Vance, part of some frat club in ROH when you used to be considered the future and you used to be part of LFI. If you wait too long, you're going to end up getting shuffled around in different gimmicks, groups, and then get forgotten about.
I'll do you one better, maybe, considering, well, right now it is one better considering where they're at. You know what happens when you just kick that can down the road further and further, and it'll be their time someday. And the star of the future eventually gets tired of waiting for the future. You end up with a Mike Santana.
Or Cody Rhodes.
Or Cody Rhodes. Like, yes. Absolutely. You know, this is not exclusive to any one promotion by any means, but, you know,
Santana, we're talking about Santana,
If people are going to, you know, one of the biggest sins that AEW has often had lauded against it has been, you know, that matches or programs or pushes or whatever do get saved for further down the road. And sometimes we end up not getting to have those matches or pushes or programs or what have you. The push of Proud and Powerful never came because I'm sure it always felt like that was something we can get to later. Right. Yep. And unfortunately, it being a great example of it, the never comes, you know, later is not a guarantee. You know, for one reason or another, whether that be injury, circumstances, or just people growing impatient, you can't guarantee that things are going to work out if you don't take advantage of something that's hot now. You know, I think that, you know, you look at Preston Vance, that's a very good example. There's a whole crop of people who kind of came into AEW around that same sort of time, you know, that kind of AEW dark elevation kind of era, where a lot of them are looked at as like, oh, that's someone to keep an eye on. So, and maybe part of that is some of them haven't necessarily like grabbed the brass ring at any real point, but at the same time, there were lots of people who were, you know, looking at an Anna Jay, a Preston, all the Dark Order guys, I guess, because I was going to say Alan Angels, you know, all these guys who are kind of like, again, filling out that AEW roster of a lot of these people being like, they could be a star in a few years. All of a sudden, a few years goes by and they're not really in a different position unless you're Alan Angels and take it upon yourself to look elsewhere for work. later doesn't always come, So, and that's not to say any of them should have necessarily been pushed right at that moment either. But I'm just saying that if you don't and think that you will simply, as a rule, have the opportunity to do that later, you may end up be disappointed. I want to go back to, again, what the very beginning of the conversation kicked off with, thanks to our lovely super chat, which was, wrestler careers last longer than they used to. And while that is very much the case, everyone's got a bump card. Everyone's career will come to an end at a certain point, and maybe that'll be their own accord. Maybe it won't. You never know how long a career you're going to have in any sort of athletic business. So if you are simply going to rest on your laurels and continue to think that tomorrow will always be there, there will come a day where there will not be a tomorrow for that specific guy. And I want to see as many of these people being put in a position to make as much money as they can for as long as they can at a high enough level so that when that day and time comes, they've had a career that they can look back on with a great amount of love and also a great amount of money in their bank account. I don't think that is an irresponsible or I don't think that is ever going to be, I forget what word I'm looking for right now. It's not a stretch to ask for that. That I don't think is too much to ask when, again, simply the only thing holding some of these people back from getting pushed is their age.
Yeah.
That, again, has been the main point of this conversation, right? Because you can look at anybody and ask, why didn't this guy get pushed? Why didn't that guy get pushed? Why didn't he or she or whoever get pushed at any given time? How did they go about this sort of push? That doesn't matter so much, to me, because there are plenty of older people like you. Again, a large part of this conversation has also come, to include like a bunch of NXT people who are in their 30s and whatever. And that wasn't so much a matter of age, but there is a large part of, regardless of if you are, super young or at any point in your wrestling career, you can be looked at as tomorrow's star, but tomorrow doesn't come, right? That is a big point that I want to get to in this whole discussion, because my God, Javon Evans, to bring it all back, is simply too good to end up wasting away his 20s, waiting for an opportunity that, through whatever circumstances, has every chance imaginable to not come. But the opportunity is presenting itself now, and you are doing a disservice to yourself, your brand, and to him as a wrestler by not seizing that opportunity.
I also would like to say I do not want to wait 10 years and we're doing Javon Mania, because now it's like a groundswell of people want Javon Evans to get pushed after 10 years on the main roster, languishing, part of makeshift tag teams and short mid-card title reigns. Let's not do the ruthless aggression era. Let's not do the PG era. Let's do something different. Javon Evans is too talented. Obafemi's too talented. Thea Hale is true. Thea Hale was only 22 years old. My goodness, if anyone that should end the title reign of JC Jane, it should be her, because they got a long history on NXT being mates, part of Chase U, and JC Jane turned on Chase U, started Fatal Influence. So if there was like a storyline to make everything come full circle, it should be JC Jane. But you also got Tatum Paxley, who's been there since 2.0 days, been there for a while. She's now a number one contender. Maybe she can be champion, because the rumor has it that JC Jane's injured at the moment. But there's so many women in NXT that are talented, they're the future. Everyone's talking about I want to say Lacey, but there's someone named surname Reed, I forgot her name, the newest member of Fatal Influence. There's so many young people there that you look at them and you know what? Tony D'Angelo, what do you do with him in the main roster? He got killed off in NXT. What do you do? You know what I'm saying? What do you actually do with him on the main roster? Because I was speaking to Male Painesville Dan, and I was saying the D'Angelo family was a SmackDown ready or even Raw ready mid card stable, and now that you split them up, they have to start all over again. And now you've got Shining Stacks Lorenzo now with his real life fiance, and I'm like, wife? They got married? Did they get married? Did he get married to Ariana Grace, but they.
I don't think so.
But
I
now
didn't know her, so I did not see wedding photos come up. So I
I know
don't
they
think that's
engaged. What I'm
happened.
trying to say is
Yeah.
Ariana Grace had a great character. You know, she was one of the highlights, you know, until she got injured, again, injury, whatever. Ariana Grace is another person where you can see her part of Chelsea's group. Chelsea's looking for a new tag team partner. Why is Ariana Grace just chilling in NXT when she's got the charisma, she's got the fundamentals? Just put her with Chelsea because she's obviously a character, you know, wrestler. Why not just do that? Because Shannon is now stuck. Why did they break up with the Angel family? I'm asking that question because it does not make sense. But that's a conversation for another time. Ridge Holland did kill Chase U. You know, he ruined Laney Reed. Thank you, as a purist.
The
I knew it was
chat
your
is
name,
coming to Sat's aid. Speaking
Laney
of the
Reed.
chat,
Yeah.
thank you again to Black Yakuzu 94 here saying another point here. Sometimes wrestler fans have to force the issue and become undeniable to the bookers. Becky, Cody, and Swerve come to mind, who kind of broke through by force. I think that is a good point to bring up. Absolutely. Because you look at, like, you know, there are certain people, like you brought up, you know, Steve Austin's name earlier, where he broke through just by that sheer hunger and force of will that he was not going to be anything less than a massive success in pro wrestling. And I do think that there is something to, you know, some people who are a bit more proactive in terms of taking it, for sure. But also, I don't necessarily know that you would need to do that if the people who are making those decisions in the first place were a bit better at their job. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and in some cases that's more fair than others, you know, like in the case of like Swerve, I think he was only in AEW for a fairly short amount of time, all things considered, you know, before his big push started. And at the same time, his time in that, you know, in that interim was still spent, generally speaking, pretty well, laying out the groundwork for a lot of things to come, whether that be what I'm sure would have been a great eternal rival to have with Keith Lee, you know, as the main event guy. May COVID be damned. But generally speaking, yeah, I do think having someone go and take the ball from whoever has it, I think that is, you know, that is not a surefire route to success, you know, but that will get attention put on you one way or the other. I'm not going to say that every example of that, if you just applied that to everyone, I'm not sure that everyone would have the same success as these people. But the hunger was there from all of them. They wanted it. You know, if you were going to have that, and you look and you apply that very same thing to people like a Mike Santana, who I brought up earlier, right? I think a lot of that same ambition that Black Yakuza is talking about with regards to Cody, Becky, Swerve, where it's just like they're not going to take that no for an answer. They're going to go out and they're going to make that of them themselves, whether that be in the promotion that they were currently in or in another one or whatever. Having the drive to do that, I think, definitely does put you in the driver's seat of your career much more than it doesn't. You know, obviously there are, it's not a hard and fast rule either, but generally speaking, I would agree with the point for sure.
You can also get this thing as well where Brian Danielson was pushed. You can say, because we're talking about hunger Steve Austin had. So Steve Austin, it's kind of weird because not a lot of people had the internet like that to know Steve Austin's ECW run, unless you're a diehard wrestling fan and you know, oh, this guy's got so much to offer. Because you look at a Ringmaster and you're like, that's completely different to anything you saw in ECW. But he had to bring that attitude and that hunger to the forefront, and he became undeniable. But he wasn't the original guy either. Again, this is the accident. So, you know, it's funny when you said it, like inept bookers. Isn't Vince McMahon's entire history, ha ha ha, he's so inept, he failed upwards so many times. So many people bring him great ideas. Because if it's up to Vince McMahon, the main event of WrestleMania, the mid card of a WrestleMania would be Ringmaster versus Rocky Maivia. Because they're not main evented nothing. Let's keep it a buck. So I am saying that guys like Carmelo Hayes has the hunger, but he's playing the game and he's trying to do the Bryan Danielson thing of like, if I can get a groundswell of support online, if they can voice their opinion, hopefully that, because that's like the third or the C route the fans rallying behind to get you pushed. Didn't work out for Karrion Kross, but hopefully, who knows that, I don't know. It's will Carmelo Hayes get there? Will we be back here in 2026, you and I doing a ruthless discussion saying what the heck are we doing? You know?
Yeah. I hope not. And if there is anything to take away from this conversation, if you're listening to it or anything, like, because I always enjoy these conversations. I think, I've very often said, Sat, that you spur very good, intricate thoughts in my head when we talk about wrestling. We have good discussion. We do touch on things and go places and conversations that I probably wouldn't go with other people. And I very much appreciate that. As for myself, like the point of the whole conversation that I want to get out of, rather than just shining a light on here is this issue that we think should be addressed. Again, we as fans certainly can do our part in trying to, prompt change for this. Be proactive with these. Don't look at things as oh, woe is us and it's a bad time and nothing will ever change and sadness and woe. No, show the support as much as possible for people like Javon Evans, for people like Carmelo Hayes, for whoever your favorites are, regardless of who they are. If you are looking at people who have yet to get pushed, for one reason or another, we can have as much of a role in making that happen as anything, as long as people are willing to, again, go out there and make their voices heard. It has happened many a time before. It can happen again. If we care enough about hashtag we want Mellow, we need to get it. We need to get it going, because I do. Like I've always said, like I've said on this podcast, I want these guys to be making as much money as they can, because careers are not that long, all things considered, and they are too talented to be wasting away. So that is how I would that's my concluding paragraph to this edition of Ruthless Discussion. Sat, do you have anything more that you would like to add to the topic?
No, I think we did a decent job of following up what Brian Alvarez mentioned about young guys that are undeniable and pushing them to the moon, because Keith Lee gets mentioned in there. Keith Lee is another guy that when he started in NXT, he wasn't particularly young either, because he got rejected so many times in the past, but through sheer talent, he made it to developmental when he could just put him in the main roster. But what I'm trying to say is, support the wrestlers you want to support, rally behind them, make them undeniable, and please, let's end this age gap that we have, the age problem we have.
No more ageism in pro wrestling.
Please.
In 2026, we're leaving ageism behind, and even let's do that before then. Thank you very much, Sat, for a very lovely conversation as always. Thank you to all of our mutual wrestle purists who have joined us on this fine Wednesday evening. We are going to be back tomorrow on the Wrestle Purist member feed with our review of AEW Dynamite. One of these weeks, they're going to stop doing 3-hour shows and make it an easy 2-hour deal. I'm pretty sure they're doing Dynamite Collision as a 3-hour. Maybe it's just a 3-hour taping. God, I hope so, because I've had enough of these 2.5 hour to 3 hour shows.
My notes.
I'm gonna have so many notes. Our podcasts are gonna be even longer than usual. Thankfully, that's not too bad of a burden to bear, because I very much enjoy talking wrestling with you, Sat, talking wrestling to and with all of you fine people out there in TV land. So make sure that you are signed up as a member to join us tomorrow on the Wrestle Purist member feed, and we will see you then. We will talk all the things AEW heading into Wrestle Dream. So stay beautiful, y'all. We will see you then. Peace.